Hey, I'm Jenny Davis, and thank you for joining us today for the ABA Journal's 10 Questions Live Google Hangout. I am live right now with Pennsylvania attorney Jeff Cedar, and he is the founder of a company called Equine Biomechanics and Exercise Physiology, EQB for short. And basically, he applies cutting-edge and innovative sports medicine techniques to racehorses. And he helps advise the owners of the racehorses whether to buy or sell their horses and which horses will be able to go the distance. His company kind of flew under the radar until pretty recently when one of his major clients had a horse, a nice little horse called American Pharaoh, who won the Triple Crown. And then the story came to light that the owner had in the past tried to sell the horse, and it was Jeff Cedar who intervened and said, if you need money, sell your house. Don't sell this horse because it's going to become a champion. So we're here again with Jeff, and we're going to talk to him about his company and his life and his career. We have a lot of questions, and I'll just start with I guess a big question. What do you do? What's your day-to-day like at EQB? I know it's not just papers and horses. You own 150 acres, and you actually train horses on site.
I actually deal with I'm in a barn in the mornings. I actually see horses.
About what time?
I look at horses out my windows. I live with animals in a rural area, but I travel a lot because I have to go to racehorse auctions. You do 500 to 1,000 racehorses at a time at an auction to analyze them, watch them running, look at them in their stalls and walking, look through their data, take measurements. So my life is kind of split between very rural, working with animals, and kind of very hectic, technical auction grounds around the country on hundreds and hundreds of horses at a crack, young horses.
And you go to the horse auctions, yes?
Yes, that's what we do. We have to find them before they've raced, otherwise the cost would be over or something minimum. And I'm not practicing really anymore, although I still licensed, and along in the way of my career, I used my law degree a lot.
Well, and I know that EQB is your full-time business right now, but you actually founded this company in 1978. So tell me about. I mean, you were running almost 2, 3, 4 jobs at one time for decades.
Yes, I was. I call us we're not just an A team, we're the type A team. We're we may be crazy, but we're not stupid. Everybody's been a pretty hard worker. Yeah, I worked a bazillion hours. I just did nothing but work weekends for years. And I
want to interject. It's not like you're working at a small firm, a big firm, clocking unpredictable hours. I mean, you were a securities portfolio manager and the CEO of 2 major corporations.
The 2 major corporations were both bankrupt when I got there.
Okay.
One of them became one of the most profitable textile companies in the United States, and it was number 11 in manufacturing in its field. And the other one was a chain of 40 department stores in Southern California, which was on its rear end. I got it back to operating profit and then sold it, and they promptly tanked it again, the new guys, but that wasn't my fault. But yeah, I was... So in each case, what I did was kind of reinvent. I kind of look into the center of what was going on there and try and say, what is it about this that works, what doesn't work? What's the paradigm that I should be doing here? What's their paradigm they're operating under? And that's easy to say. It's hard to do, but it's powerful. And if you can do it, you can really turn around something. In the retail field, these people were going bust with stores and strip malls. They thought that they needed to be in the big malls, which at that time were the most profitable and successful. But their clientele was old, and they thought that they needed younger clients because the clients were all going to die off. I just looked at it and I said, profitable stores in your retirement communities, the biggest growing demographic is senior people, and they don't want to go to the huge malls. They want to park in front and walk. So you just don't understand customers and what. They wanted to be what was the hottest, latest thing in the mall, and they had a gold mine by being just who they were. So I just stripped away all the crap, and the thing worked really well. And I did the same thing in textiles. Everybody defined their industry by who they sold to, what industry. You made automotive fabric, or you made draperies, or you made upholstery, or you made bedding, or you made clothing or something. And I didn't do that. I got much more sophisticated, complicated equipment that could do many more things. And I did the high end everywhere. So I defined my market by what my machinery could do, not by the end use of the product. And so I ended up cherry picking lots of markets and putting them together and became more profitable and more versatile. And then I also ended up adding all kinds of fashion opportunities where other people were pursuing commodities. So they were beating each other up for commodity prices. And I could charge a premium because I had more custom stuff. And in horse racing, you know, I watched, they were doing it eyeball and intuition. They've been doing it the same way for 300 years. Everybody was losing money. The top people had awful, I mean, maybe 10% a year of what they bought was turned out to be a good horse that was considered terrific. And I said, you know, I can do better, and I have. My track record is now 5-6 times better than the next best people in the industry, or than anything that was done before me. I've had probably 5 world champions in the last 7 years, and many, many, many more that became stallions. Most people go to the Kentucky Derby like once in a lifetime. I had 5 horses I bought for people there last year, 20% of the field. Your odds of getting there are 30,000 are born a year, and you only get a shot at when you're 3-year-old, once in a lifetime for each horse. 30,000 born, 20 can qualify. And I had 5. And I had 2 or 3.
Incredible.
2 or 3 the year before that. In the last 7 years, we were second with the different clients we've worked with. We were second about 4 times, and one time we had a heavy favorite who got hurt the day before the race. And then, of course, this year we were in the winner's circle. And you can't do that with hot air. And you can't do it with money either, because the Arabs have thrown billions at it and have yet to win a Kentucky Derby. And they have the best pedigrees and the best trainers and the best everything money can buy. And their track record ain't like ours.
One of our readers had asked you, well, let me just interject now that if you have questions that are coming up for Jeff, in the lower bar there's an email address, and you're welcome to email your questions in to 10questionslive@abajournal.com, which does bring us to a question. One of our readers asked whether it was really all sports medicine, or if there really is an art to horse training that makes like that last, I guess, piece of the puzzle of a champion. Okay,
the art part always pushes my buttons, because when I got there, it was always eyeball and intuition and tradition, and that, we were greeted very hostily by the industry. They were not interested in somebody who was a game changer or technology, and they were, in the beginning, there was ridicule, and then it was, when it looked like we were actually doing something, then it was hostile, and now it's grudging acknowledgement, because we just, you know, you can't be ignored anymore. So you can't do it with eyeball and intuition, you know, although they're important, you know. But I think what it is, it's more than that. It's an enormous amount of science. We had to create, along the way, we had to create the data that, and we had to create the equipment to get the data, and then we had years and years and thousands of horses to figure out what was important and to get the measurements on it and look for it. And, you know, so there's a lot of science across a lot of disciplines: engineering, exercise physiology, biomechanics. When you're all done, it takes some wisdom to sort through all that and use it. And I think if there's an art to it, I like to think of it as acquiring the experience and the wisdom, rather than just data and science. I mean, a good idea is pretty much worthless. When we were able to combine it with some of the very best horses, my partner is a lifelong horseman, you know, who knows all the traditional stuff. And when we really started to take off was when we combined. We put what we knew over top of the basics. When we were doing the technical stuff well and the basics wrong, that got us nowhere. So once we started using it as an add-on to the traditional things, it became very powerful. But it took a lot of real hard work and science to make it work. We thought that the gait of the horse, you know, digitizing in slow motion the gait of the horse would be powerful, but it took 20 years and, you know, 50,000 horses and all kinds of engineers and mathematicians to figure out what the hell we were supposed to be looking for. We thought that the exercise physiology of the heart would be important, but again, it took years, an enormous amount of technology to figure out what parts of what was going on in the horse's heart made it different. One of the key things somebody asked about is one of the paradigms, one of the things I learned. I didn't just learn doing sports medicine when I was one of the originators of the Olympic sports medicine movement. By the way, I qualified for the Olympics as a wrestler when I was in college, at the trials, but I wasn't anywhere near good enough to make the team. But anyway, one of the things I
So
learned.
Harvard was calling. I mean, why go to the Olympics when you can go to Harvard, right?
Well, I don't think I would have made it, but I did. I forget what I was going to say now.
Well, tell me how this all applied to American Pharaoh. I mean, what was it that you were
American
honing
Pharaoh
in
was the
on?
culmination of all this work. We bought the dam. She was an extraordinary physical specimen, but she got hurt after her second race, but she became his mother. The horses that he was, he was the stallion that she was mated to were the results of us buying, going through over thousands and thousands of horses and buying the physical specimens that had these specific traits. Well, that's what I was going to say. What we learned one of the things I learned, besides all the technical science of working so hard in the Olympic sports medicine movement, was that the paradigm that we had to change was that medicine knew the difference between injured and sick and normal, but they didn't know the difference between normal and elite. And it turns out the difference is physically, mechanically, measurements between normal and elite, and normal and sick and injured was just as far a distance, but the two different sides of the equation.
Huh.
You knew you had all this data on normal human beings and on sick and injured ones. It didn't do squat to help you understand the difference between the elite and the normal. You had to develop that, and I had to do that for racehorses. So I did that. So American Pharaoh, his father and his mother, both came out of this program. They were identified that way. They were developed and trained using that kind of stuff. And then back from that, the guy, when he went into horse racing, he started out, and we had him as the leading stable in the United States in his third year, spending a tiny fraction of what some of his competitors did. So he was developing, and he was using this technology for 6 or 7 years, and honing it and building it and getting the sire and the dam, and finally the American Pharaoh. And then when we knew when we had it, so we didn't let it go. Another guy that is a major client of mine has twice been the leading owner and the leading breeder of thoroughbred racehorses in the United States. And he's a lot of people say, how does he do it? He doesn't pay $1 million for his mares. He doesn't buy these champion mares. How did he put together a broodmare team that was the leading in the United States? And that's against incredible competition, including from Arab money. And the answer was because he was buying his mares based on all this technology on top of the traditional, so that they were all really special specimens. And then when they had a foal or two, if they didn't throw what we were looking for, we would get rid of them and find one that would. So it took, so then after 10 years, all of a sudden, bang, he's the leading breeder and he's a genius, and he tells people he's just got the best pedigree guys in the world. I'm not going to tell him how he's doing it. And so, it was like, I tell people it was easy. It only took 35 years and several $1 million of private research to be an overnight success.
So you're really used to just waiting and biding your time.
Apparently, yeah, I guess the whole of it, I'm a bulldog. I guess I got used to it and I didn't like it. I spent 20 years, it took a lot of money to do this research. And I guess I had the talent to make money, but I didn't want to do what I was doing. I didn't want to be in the office at the textile. I didn't want to be in the retail chain running around selling spandex panties. I didn't want to do it. So I was completely compulsive about the horses. Yeah. So
it was never a pipe dream to you. It was like making it happen.
It cost me a fortune, and I didn't make any money for a long time. Now it works. Now it's making people a lot of money, but
where was that sweet spot? Because, you have a business and you have a family that you are helping to support. And, how did you know that this had reached a stage where you could walk away from being a CEO of a company?
Well, the sweet spot was when I built up enough value in the company I could sell it. Everybody wanted to buy it. I said, well, what am I sitting here for? Let them have it. Finally, I had enough money I didn't have to do anything else. I guess that was it. And then when I did concentrate, starting about 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I guess, when I did concentrate on just the horses, the whole thing just took off. So I guess being distracted was a problem. Having to earn all the money was holding me back, maybe.
Well, let me ask you about all the things that you've invented. I know in the print 10 questions, we touched on the heart rate monitor and also the bone scanner. But tell me about the bag of horse legs and.
Okay. Well, we built a Holter monitor way back when there was an Apple IIc computer. There weren't even computers back then. They were just beginning with the PCs, and we took parts from this and that. We built something the size of pack of cigarettes that would do the heart rate meters and take an EKG. We had to design a custom chip and have it made for us in Japan with Hitachi. We figured out a bone scanner. We were trying to predict when horses broke their legs. And it's a long story how we figured out how we were going to do it, but we ended up using military-grade parts. We went down to black boxes around Washington, D.C. and bought chips and things. And we were sending A-mode ultrasound through horses' cannon bones, through their shin bones. And we were testing them. I got the legs of every horse that broke down at a local racetrack and froze them and sent them up to MIT, where I bought a Instrom testing unit. And the guy there, professor there, was testing them there, sending ultrasound through it and cycling them with the forces, the timing and the direction and the quantity of forces they would experience when a horse ran. How did we know those? Because we put force plates in racetracks and put transducers in horseshoes and high-speed cameras and coordinated it all and filmed it. And some of that stuff was published in the Journal of Biomechanics with the professors who did it, from the University of Delaware, for example, a guy named Kingsbury and a guy named Barlow and a guy named Pratt at MIT. And anyway, we got so we could predict when in the racehorse simulated race, the leg would break. And so then we decided we should be able to do that for horses in vivo. But at that point, we had a meeting, and there was a doctor there, and he said, if you can actually do this, this will diagnose osteoporosis, and you should do it in humans. So we sold it to Johnson & Johnson, and it's out there now. They ended up putting it in a subsidiary, and then it bounced around through a couple of other companies, and it won the New Medical Device of the Year in Europe in 1986, and it's around all kinds of places in the OBGYN offices to testing bone density in the military and this and that and the other. But it never got back to horses because we just moved on. And so there was that invention. There was the heart rate meter. We published articles on the quadruped locomotion. I was not a veterinarian, and I was not a professor in biomechanics. So I never got a grant. I always had to earn the money for my research. None of my papers were accepted anywhere. So finally, I got pissed off in the locomotion stuff, and they were rejecting everything. So one of the first paper I actually got accepted was I pointed out they didn't even know the gait of a racehorse. It wasn't what they thought. Right? The actual racehorse coming up the stretch was not moving the way all the textbooks said. And I proved it with like hundreds and hundreds of horses and digitized slow motion from on real racetracks, and it cost a flipping fortune to do. But I don't think anybody realized it was like a tongue-in-cheek saying, "Okay, guys, you don't think I know about locomotion, quadruped locomotion? You don't even know the basic gait of a racehorse. That they're actually off the ground. They bear no weight at all in any leg, 3 times within each stride, and a real racehorse going flat out." And that was news to them. So I thought, well, if that's news to you, then how much else do you know? And the answer was not a lot. I actually became one of the authorities in that area without any formal training in it. So did you get? I got 3 degrees from Harvard. I have 3 degrees from Harvard, all of them with high honors. It's not like I wasn't educated, and I was pre-med. And I mean, I had a lot of science and statistics. Excuse me, I'm sorry. I get carried away.
No, it did.
So those are a few of the things.
Feedback from the community, from the scientific community.
Oh yeah, there were other things we came up with. They were using saddle pads. We said, well, what are you using? They use these terry cloth things like towels, and they're fluffy white. It was ridiculous. I said, why aren't we using high-tech energy absorbing foam as a saddle pad, right? So the horses don't get. Now everybody does it that way. We should have patented it. We looked at the silks, and I had worked with a luge team, and they wear these tight, and the helmets, and the cyclists have these teardrop helmets. So I produced a teardrop helmet and skin-tight silks, and I had a couple of our clients were using them for a couple of years, and then like the 3rd year we were out doing it, we were at the World Championships with one of the horses, and somebody from Danskin came out, and Sports Illustrated, they did a huge splash about the invention of aerodynamic silks for horses. And I remember writing them a letter and saying, you morons, you don't do anything but read your press pack. If you turned around, you would have seen there was another horse in the paddock that had them on. And if you'd asked where they got them, they would have said they've been using them for 3 years. And they came out of the Olympic Sports Medicine spinoff. Not Danskin, who was like 3 years later. Anyway,
you didn't have a publicist.
We came up with all kinds of stuff. Most of it, people didn't give a damn about it. They didn't use it. They didn't want to spend the money. Yeah, and it honestly, I guess not. I don't know. We still, if they had They have conferences on the racetracks, whether they should have synthetic racetracks, and they'll invite all these veterinarians and these engineers. None of them know squat about how horses move on one racetrack or another. I've been there 35 years, high motion speed, high definition, slow motion film, digitizing every single one of those horses, getting all the data, seeing how it related to their injuries the rest of their career in every race they ever ran, and how well they did and all that. I know the difference in how they move on the different surfaces, and I know how it affects their earnings and how long they can expect it to be last before the injuries knock them out. And do you think I could get an invitation to any one of those things? No, I can't. I mean, they're not even interested. You can send them the data and they won't use it. So these are not horsemen who are jealous because they have 8th grade educations. These are professionals. These are veterinarians, guys who own racetracks. So I finally, I just was bitter about it, and finally said, you know what, this is actually the greatest thing. I'm going to have another 10 years of kicking their ass, with exclusivity on this stuff.
Yeah.
So that's my attitude now.
Unless you give it away, like you just create an app or something.
Well, that was what I did finally. I said it's going to have to be a kind of a Christian thing, even though I wasn't raised as a Christian. I said I'm going to give it away, and that's what's going to give it value. So I published some of the stuff. And then when I published it, and it was on thousands of horses, and it was all this done, and it was edited by the leading people in the fields, and it was, and it had to get refereed to get in these leading journals. And then everybody said, "Oh my God," And at that point, I started to have some credibility, and then I stopped publishing because I said, "Well, I'm not giving it away anymore. I gave you enough to show you the power of it, and it's real." And then after that, of course, then the power of it was that we started showing up at the Kentucky Derby with 4 or 5 horses every year, 3 or 4 at least. And people started saying, how the hell did that happen? I mean, the first year it was a fluke, right? The second year it was a fluke. Finally, I published an ad that said, my dad said 3 flukes is a trend. This was the 3rd year we had multiple.
Where was the ad?
In one of the industry publications.
That's awesome.
So, I don't know. We have clients now that are, that like us, and we like them, and that we're successful with them. And I think maybe some of this chip on my shoulder is from 35 years of banging my head against the wall, but it's not really that bad anymore. The past few years, I mean, there's some people who will never use it. Although I have to say, I did a survey, one of these blind surveys. I hired a company to do a survey of all my clients, and one of the questions I asked them was, "What's the most important thing in picking a horse?" And I gave them choices, and like 90% of them said pedigree. And all I can tell you is if there's one thing, if you had to pick something to ignore to get a good racehorse, that would sure itself, in my opinion, be what you would completely ignore. It'd be like going to the Olympics and asking everybody who their parents were. It just doesn't work. And I could cite statistics, but they don't believe it because they don't. I don't know.
So it sounds like you're getting ready to beat your head against the door of another industry with your racetrack. Tell me about how that's going.
So then after everything was working pretty good with the racehorses, I started studying the racetracks themselves the same way, looking at all the statistics and the patterns.
With your extra time, you started doing that.
Yes, I did. And I ended up with filing cabinets full of statistics about how many horses raced in each race at each track, what the weather was that day, and what the blah, 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 blah. And I realized that I could do better. First thing I realized was that the major thing driving the amount of money bet was not what they were saying, whether it was good horses or how big the purses were or all these other things, how nice the racetrack was. Those were all not major drivers of the revenue and the bettors. What was driving at the number one was the number of horses in the race. Because if you're a professional gambler, what you want is more horses in the race so that the guys picking them by their name are less likely to pick what you want. So you get more of the money. Because it's pari-mutuel. You're betting against the other bettors, not against the race. So it was the number one, and then I went around publishing that stuff because I was hoping I would become a consultant to racetracks. And I had all the data and did all this, and I went to symposiums, and everybody adopted it. Nobody paid me a dime. It became printed in all of their stuff about how they were improving that. And I thought, well, this is crazy. I did all that, and I got nothing for it, so I'm not doing that anymore. So, but I came up with 5 or 6 other things that could make it nicer, safer for the horses and jockeys, nicer for the clients, make a lot more money than the way they're doing it now. And I did it the same way with a whole lot of multivariate discriminant analysis. I guess it was big data before big data was. We were moneyballs, in 35 years ago. We were using big data. I had to use IBM 360s. At one point in my career, I had a doctor, a friend of mine from Harvard, who was in New York, one of the hospitals, and I would go in at midnight, and he would get me. I would put our data on their computer at midnight and be off by 7 a.m. so we could do all our computing of all the data. Anyway, it works, and I learned a lot. So I've learned things about betting. I work for some of the biggest whales betting now because I learned things about what goes on in parimutuel stuff. It's not what people expect. So I don't know. I mean, what can I say?
You're developing. You've got projects underway.
There are projects underway. One on a racetrack, and it's more it's computer aided. It's like the Lehman traders and the stocks and bonds. We have lightning computer things to racetracks for betting. But we're not tilting.
You're also a community activist, and I remember you had said, I know we're running out of time, but you do a lot for underprivileged kids in inner cities, and
I started, and for 17 years I ran, and I gave most of the money I didn't spend on research I gave there. I gave millions of bucks to them. We developed a program for making films with inner city kids by accident. Let me just turn that off. I was trying to do something against violence in Philadelphia with a group of people, and they asked me to make a documentary about people working against violence in Philadelphia. And in the process of doing that, there were so many teenagers trying to get into the picture, and it was supposedly impossible that you couldn't get to be interested in anything in really tough sections of the. So anyway, short thing, I ended up getting real filmmakers and real producers and to gather together these kids in homeless shelters and detention centers and inner city schools and going house to house in tough neighborhoods. And we made films. We made 300 films. We won national awards going up against university film schools with kids who had flunked everything they ever did, or who were out of jails and stuff because they did it about their own life stories, and they were powerful stories. And we got grants from the National Endowment for the Arts and the Pew Charitable Trust, and it got the sincerest form of flattery. It got copied a lot of places all over the country as a way to reach these kids because they were interested in it. And then they learned to use a computer for the editing, and they learned to work on a work site with professional adults instead of just flipping burgers. It had great results. I mean, in Philadelphia, where I was, there were like 70% of the kids in some of these high schools were expected to end up unemployed or in jail, and more than half the girls got pregnant and this and that. Maybe 30% would make it, graduate out of high school and go on to something. With the kids in our program, we flipped that. We got 70% of them going on to some arts program or college and getting jobs.
So you basically prove that pedigree doesn't matter. It's what's inside.
I think that, I've always been.
Of the kid, of the horse. They can do it.
Well, I tell people that's because being raised Jewish. I was raised Jewish at a Philadelphia prep school. So I had enough of hearing about pedigree by the time I was in about 10th grade. So I didn't want to hear it anymore. That's true. Yeah, it's true.
So, with our last minute,
it's the old nature and nurture thing. Clearly there are genetic components to all this stuff. And in the past, I was about, they aren't meaningless, but they're just nowhere near as powerful as a real good mechanical and physiological understanding of the actual individual standing in front of you and what can be made out of that.
So there were several questions from newbie attorneys. Do you have a 60-second nugget of advice that you can give to new lawyers on how do they achieve their dream like you did? Yeah,
I think first you got to know what you want to do. And I think, and that's always not so easy. But it's not so hard. It's like when I looked down at the floor with Archibald Cox in that meeting, and he said, "What do you like?" And I said, "Horses." I was just being honest, for a change. And I think it was a breakthrough for me because it was true. And so I went after it. But I went after it kind of smart. I studied the industry. I did this and that. And my second piece of advice was get a mentor. You want to be in equine law, go to the thoroughbred, go to the HBPA, which is the trainers and owners, like their union, their organization, the jockey guild. Go to the thoroughbred owners organization's meetings. You'll meet lawyers there. They have their Saratoga every year at Saratoga Springs, New York. They have an equine law conference sponsored by the Albany Law School. And every lawyer who has anything to do with horses goes there from all over the industry. You just go and meet these people. Find lawyers that work with these organizations. And you spend 20 minutes with them. You'll be amazed. You get 20 ideas, a really good way to make money and to earn jobs, especially working with horses. So I really recommend the organizations themselves, like in Thoroughbred Owners and Breeders Organization, the Horsemen's Benevolent Protective Association, and the Albany Law School, Saratoga. Every year they have it for 2 or 3 days in Saratoga Springs as a way to just get a mentor who has been a lawyer in horses or at the race.
So get out there, find what you love, and do the work, it sounds like.
Yeah, that's it. You love horses, go be with horses, find the lawyers that are around there.
Well, thank you so much for being with us. I really appreciate it. This is fantastic. It's going to be archived at the ABA Journal 10 Questions site. So if you didn't have a chance to join us when we were live, you'll be able to still catch up and hear all this great advice. And then join us, please, next month when we talk to Beth Heifetz about what it takes to attract top judicial clerks to your firm. Thank you so much. Have a terrific afternoon.